All right. So, the subject of the teaching segment that I'm going to talk about for a few minutes today is entitlement. Now, that word can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But fundamentally, what entitlement is a belief and a lifestyle of expecting others to do for you, believing that you deserve things simply because you exist. Now, this definitely shows up in the workplace. It shows up in finances. It can show up in family life. It can show up in churches. It can show up certainly in your business. Really, every area of life, entitlement can be an issue. So this is applicatory across the board. Now, this time of year is a time of year, Christmas season and Thanksgiving season, the holidays. There's many things going on. There's people making trips for travel. There's some people that love it all and all they're nuts, all the glamour and all the lights, and they're all real happy and bubbly and doing all the things and running around busy. There's others who are very discouraged. They're reminded of the loss of loved ones. They're reminded of different things that bring up feelings of grief. There's many emotions surrounding this. What's very common across the board when I talk to folks is people are overcommitted, they're overly busy, and they're overly stressed this time of year. There's just more things we're doing in finances, and we might be spending more money and all of those things. But one of the things that kind of overlaps, and sometimes it's revealed, so for example, for parents here, this might be revealed in your children, and so this might be applicable to apply this lesson and talk about this with them some. But it's also applicable in how we think through things, and that is entitlement. Are you expecting certain things? Do you expect certain things from family members? Do you expect certain things of the holiday season? Do you feel you have to have things? Now, from a financial perspective, here's where I want to go with this. Sometimes when I talk with folks, Christmas is a season where there's a lot of giving going on. There's Giving Tuesday following Thanksgiving. There's end of year type of giving challenges for a lot of nonprofits and a lot of churches to meet their budget, especially if they are on a calendar year kind of budgeting cycle. And so there's all these things. There's a lot of generosity flowing out in that way. But it also is a time when people can get into a lot of trouble when it comes to how they handle their finances in the holidays. I can't tell you how many parents I've heard say something along the lines, or they might not even be parents, they might be grandparents, or they might just have some people they care about in their life. And they're very big on the idea of, well, I have to get so-and-so a gift. I have to do this. I have to do that. I have to go to this Christmas party. I have to go to that. And they start racking up and charging up. This is very common with parents and grandparents with their kids and grandkids. They want to get gifts, they want to make it special, they want to make it nice, and so even if they can't afford it, they charge it. And they end up paying for that plastic toy or for that live Christmas tree or whatever a lot more than the sticker price because they're paying off the debt on it. And it's because they believe that they have to have or they need to give a certain experience to someone else to truly be in the season or to truly make it special or to make the memories. And I know that's a challenging one because, of course, we want to give to those we care about. We want to make things special. We might even want certain things for ourselves and want to do certain things. But the reality is, if we financially cannot afford it, then we're really living out of reality. We're presuming upon the future. And that's what leads to debt. Now, I want to go a little deeper with this. Everything I've said thus far is probably somewhat logical. But I want to go a little deeper, and I'm going to actually press on the heart for a moment. Why do you deserve the things that you think you're entitled to? Why do we constantly hear in the political realm people believe that every person in a particular country is entitled to a certain salary or a certain standard of living or a certain standard of healthcare or a certain standard of education, go on and on and on down the list? A lot of it is about entitlement, what people think their right is. Well, there's some God-given rights, the right to exist, right to life. That's why the Bible instructs us to be pro-life. God creates life, and we are to value life. from beginning to end as Christians. We are to be responsible. That is a God-given right. Self-government, responsible for our own actions, accountable for those, either good or bad. And our actions determine our direction. Consistency in good habits and good actions will produce something. Yeah, bad things happen in life and unexpected things. Studying Job right now with some guys. And yeah, there's stuff unexpected that happens. That doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong. Suffering or illness or loss or grief. Even something traumatic could happen. But we're still responsible for our actions and our choices. We're responsible for how we choose to move through those things. Our basic God-given rights don't entitle us to have enormous possessions. Abraham had a lot of possessions, but he lived in a tent. God took care of the children of Israel's needs after they were freed from slavery in Egypt and complainers by giving them manna they had to collect daily and twice as much on Friday so that they'd have enough for the Sabbath, to take 2 days off, to have a day of rest, provide for that day and the next. The Lord provided for them even though they were living in tents for 40 years. They didn't inherit the land yet. They didn't get to go in. A part of that was due to their choice. They chose not to obey the Lord and by faith go in and claim the victory. Their children and grandchildren ended up being the ones that went in and by faith obeyed the Lord. And they did experience some blessings and reap things that they had not worked for. They got to go in and they took over these cities. They had houses, they had fields. They had these things. God had promised them that land. And the Lord had allowed others to occupy it, though, until their sins were full, Scripture says, until the nations self-destructed. They brought such depravity, the type of wickedness and sexual degradation going on. If you study it, the societies imploded. They could no longer sustain and survive. And God had promised that land to his people, and they entered in. The Jewish people in exile in Babylon, there was a period of time where they're going to be there because of judgment for their sin. They had lost, they had mortgaged for years and years. They had neglected the rest that God had told them to observe, and so the land had to have its Sabbaths, had to have its rest. They did not take the time to rest. So for 70 years, many people would never live to see coming back. A few would be old enough to maybe remember. Most wouldn't. They'd live their entire life in exile, have children, grandchildren, plant homes, run your business, worship God, be faithful to him there, and basically be a subculture and seek to be a blessing in the community you're in. What the Lord encourages us to do in Scripture is to have a mindset of generosity and a mindset of faithfulness above all else. Not a mindset of what can I get. Rather, it's what can I give and how can I take responsibility. How can I take care of responsibility for my family? You know, for example, when grief happens. In our family, we experienced the loss of 2 family members over the course of this year. That was unexpected. And that brought with it unexpected things. We didn't plan for that. We didn't plan for them time off and to grieve and to be missing them during the holidays. We didn't expect that. We didn't know that was coming. But taking responsibility to be there for our family, for my family and for each other and our family, and also recognizing we might have had to put some of our other responsibilities on pause, like work, taking a break or taking a few days off to be able to go through the process of grief and sort out the details and stuff associated with that. For those of you that have lost loved ones, you know what that's like. The specific situation, of course, is all unique to us, but there's some principles there and some similarities around that process that you probably understand. And so the point that I'm trying to make is entitlement is not a biblical attitude. And there, of course, are ways you can train that and teach that to others. Dave likes to say that the allowance is teaching entitlement, that someone is paying you because you live, because you're allowed to live. Well, let's see, if you're a parent, your child lives under your roof. You're feeding them, you're clothing them, you're educating them, you're taking them to church, and you're caring for them spiritually, and you're mentoring them and counseling them and discipling them. There's so many things you're doing. And those are things you do as a parent because you are responsible before God and responsible for your family and responsible to do your best to what? Be successful as a family? Well, really the most important thing, to be faithful. Whether your kids grow up and make a lot of money or not is not what's most important. Whether they live faithfulness is important. Do they live lives of financial faithfulness? Whether they decide to be super successful or whether the Lord's path for them is to make a lot of money, are they faithful? Are they faithfully generous? Are they faithfully paying their bills on time? Are they faithful in their saving and putting away for rainy day? Are they faithful in protecting their family through means of different insurances and savings? That's just wise. Are they protecting their families that way through a will? Are they being faithful and not buying more house than they can afford? Are they being faithful to live within their means, or are they living beyond, which is honestly, very simply, unfaithfulness because they think they deserve or need more than what is provided to them? I realize there are circumstances of life that come and loss of jobs or things that are unexpected. That's different. Okay, that's a different scenario. We're talking about the choices you make, not the things that life throws at you that are unexpected, that then you have to make choices how to navigate. That's a whole different thing. But our primary concern should be faithfulness, and that's the point of this group. That's the point of how I do coaching. I'm concerned with faithfulness. Whether I'm coaching pastors, whether I'm coaching financially, are we being faithful? And there's things that are wisdom and risk assessment there. There are things that are clear biblical priorities and clear biblical commands. That's a matter of faithfulness, matters of obedience. And then there's matters of wisdom. Am I going to faithfully be present with my family? Or am I going to think I'm entitled to success and entitled to what quote unquote fulfills me and chase the American dream that's a lie, to go out and do everything for myself and then make enough money for my family but never be present? That was a really big thing in the culture when I grew up. A lot of dads were gone, and then it kind of transferred to moms, boss moms, gone. I see it sadly far too much. I worked in education for a while too. I've seen it far too much of parents who are out there being successful in the world and their family is quietly dying inside because the parents are not being faithful to be present with their kids. Their parents treat, this isn't everybody, but I've seen it far too often. They treat education or school or daycare, they treat it as simply somebody else watch my kids. I don't want to spend time with them. If they have the kids for a long weekend or for the holidays and they bring them back to school, they're so glad because they just couldn't stand being around their kids that long. Now I realize when shoulders are rubbed and we're in close proximity to people, it can get difficult at times. It's part of living in close proximity to others. But there's a problem with the families across our nation today because there's a lot of lack of faithfulness. There's problems in marriages when there's a lack of faithfulness. One of the largest causes for divorce, couples aren't on the same page on their finances. They have not learned how to work through that together. And that's not the same for every single couple. You got to learn how to work together and how to, for your family. But it's about faithfulness. So how can we change from an entitlement mindset to faithfulness if we're responsible for others like our kids? How can we teach that? Grandparents, how can you model and teach faithfulness? It's a little different if you're not the parents of your grandkids, but you can pass on a legacy and pass on a testimony and a witness of faithfulness. How can you do that? Men, how can you be faithful to lead your wives? Wives, how can you faithfully be engaging your home and your primary responsibilities to your family? Your husband and your children are more important than your career. And same thing goes for dad. Husband, your wife, and your kids are more important than your career. If these priorities are out of whack, now I realize there can be busy seasons, but if these priorities are out of whack and we're living for these other things rather than our God-given priorities and responsibilities, there's numerous consequences. It affects your kids, it affects your marriage, and then ultimately, it also affects society. It affects our businesses. It affects all of these other broader areas of society, but it all begins at home. So you want to know one of the biggest ways to fight entitlement and all the dysfunction surrounding that word is to model faithfulness and pursue faithfulness through a relationship with Christ that you live out and seek to model as a disciple, a continual learner of Christ in all areas of your life, in your discipline, in your use of your time, in your faithfulness and obedience to actually rest and to not overwork. That's a big problem for Americans. And to rest our bodies, a lot of health conditions are related to either being too sedentary or being too active. Literally, kids are getting sports injuries that 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds get in their bodies, and arthritis and stuff, because they're engaging in too many childhood sports, which might be because parents just don't want to spend time with their kids. Let's let them go do this and build their character. So I know it's a bit challenging, it's a bit confrontational today. And it's a time of year when we don't necessarily want to think about these types of things and slow down. But I want to encourage you, slow down, simplify, take a moment, reflect. How can you apply some of these lessons? How can you model them? Love to hear your thoughts. God bless, and I hope that this is not only a blessing, but I hope it's a bit of a challenge to some of us during this season, and that it sparks thoughtful and intentional change. Small micro changes make a big difference because your actions determine your direction, and it really defines your character. God bless.